Wow, that's 20 years ago.
It's nice.
Okay, 1:30, Mr. Houston.
Commissioners, not on your agenda, but I just passed out the monthly report in terms of your permit applications and other activity. For your information, nothing remarkable in it, just a continuous, steady, but relatively modest stream of applications. The applications we're getting seem to be growing in complexity because of the other swirling issues surrounding short plats and that sort of thing tied to water and whatnot. But in terms of numbers, they're pretty much staying the course. We have our budget discussion on October 1 during my study session agenda. We went ahead and did a spot check in terms of the numbers of applications laid against our revenues, and they're tracking pretty well. So all of that seems to be in order. So we'll go ahead and pick up the finer detail of all of that on the first. The first item on your agenda is your water availability study area. You've now gone through your public hearing on the interim controls. You've left them in place. So I'm putting together the questionnaire, to call it that, that we'll send out to the water right holders. I'm working on a plan for some outreach, some kind of a community town hall meeting or something up in that part of the world, maybe a couple. I'll figure out how best to do that and put it in front of you. The question, though, that I did want to pose, and to a point this kind of slops down into the WRIA 49 discussion. Obviously the work we do in the watershed plan revisions is going to also deal with now your water availability study area, or vice versa. Some of the things that we need to do, we can do in-house. Our buildable lands analysis, that kind of review. We can do the bibliography. We can find the different studies and whatnot that have been done. What we don't have the expertise to do is any kind of an aquifer recharge mapping or anything like that. We do have, theoretically at least, the opportunity for grant application through now the Department of Ecology's program. Do the commissioners have any interest in trying to pursue any technical expertise to be paid for out of that money, and whether we tie it back to the WRIA 49 watershed plan revisions, or whether we tie it to the Tug Upper Lower and Tamarack Springs water availability study area, I'm not sure matters, other than we'll do whatever puts the best application forward. But if the commissioners are interested in doing that, then I'll need to begin to lend some finer thought to what the structure of that hydrological study or whatever look like, and how to administer any kind of grant or other program like that we get money for.
That $50,000 local capacity grant, as I understand it, can be used for this type of
that. My one to however many now discussions with Vanessa would lead me to agree with you that we could do that. My only thought is, in the past conversation with Fish and Wildlife, and I mean it was an estimate that they gave, but a good hydrology report for a tributary, and they were talking up in the Met Howe, was about $50,000 a pop. So if we actually, and again, I guess where I'm kind of framing this as I'm going along, if we look at our buildable lands analysis, which we can do, tie it back to the different tributaries, which again is just a mapping exercise, there may be value in identifying those tributaries with the most potential for development and try to target those for some study in terms of the interface. I mean, we're all gonna agree that to some extent there's surface water, groundwater connectivity. I mean, that, I don't know that we need a study to tell us that, but a study that tries to at least gauge the source of your groundwater, whether Tunk is one example. The USGS study shows that in some reaches, it appears the Tunk recharges groundwater, but in other reaches, it actually appears where the opposite is true. Your negative reach, your gain reach. But it doesn't say to what extent. You know, it doesn't say how much groundwater movement there is. It doesn't say what the capacity of those aquifers might be. It doesn't even say necessarily where some of the aquifers are charged from, because obviously they could be water from some distance away, on how it all works. We can try to explore that at this juncture. We can do what we can do locally in-house, if you will, and use that to inform whatever applications we might generate. Thoughts?
So the 50,000 was what you had targeted for the well work, wasn't that true?
No, the 60,000, which you've already applied for,
Right.
that was the well work. The
Oh.
50,000 is the local capacity grant tied to the watershed plan revisions, which at this point they're saying is probably renewable.
Okay.
So we could get 50,000 a year for how long?
And that's for all
It's
county employees.
2021, isn't it?
But 2021's our deadline. Now, we have the 150,000, which is one-time money
But that's for the planning unit.
for the planning unit, right, exactly.
I'd say apply for it.
So, I think we need to get the best bang for our buck. We have to look at 49 as an overall. And then there are some basins that are gonna be more critical than others, more than likely. Sub-basins, yeah. So I'm wondering if we try to get, unless there's one out there, a study of 49 done, kind of a, I don't wanna call it cursory, but an overview of 49, if we can.
Then that would, I would say, review the watershed plan. Because it pointed to several basins, there was 3 of them that were pointed at during that USGS study.
Four.
4?
I think it was 4.
Okay, maybe it was 4. And so those were basins of concern during the watershed planning effort.
Prior.
And, yeah, and so I think a good review of that would give you an initial.
Okay, and then I think that Ecology has done some work in the Methow that didn't charge for it because it was again. So then I think we should probably, I would hope that initially we contact Ecology and find out, what kind of studies help us with up here, because we've done studies on closed basins over there, kind of the same exercise over here.
Yeah.
And then after that, we go, okay, now let's use our money to do. I mean, that's,
So if we take our well tracking grant, I was looking at it in kind of a progressive phasing, do your well logs, then go through and do your ground verification, that sort of thing, countywide. We could maybe shift that then to the phases will be the RIA, all of the work we need to do in 49, and then slide over and do all of the work we need to do in 48.
that's kind of where I think, and I don't know, I talked about the meeting with Watershed Council this Thursday and about them.
Last Thursday?
Yeah, this last Thursday, I met with the technical committee of the Watershed Council and Vanessa, who is the grant person. They had, Aspect put together a database.
Right.
For it. It just needs a refresh, an update with hot links and stuff like that. So, but Ecology didn't want the grants to overlap doing the same kind of exercise. So what I was thinking was, if if we took about $60,000 and focused more over here where none of that stuff's been done, and they took the $7,000 and refreshed their database, that we would at least have cursory information that we could double check against if we got all the way through and got over to there again.
So, the 50,000, though, could it be, I'm just curious about its availability this year. And, is there a timeliness issue? Because if you could make it, generic enough to,
I say we just apply for it.
yeah, that's.
Because we're going to use it.
Yeah.
Because already we have time into the preparation for the watershed plan that we can bill against. We have, if any of these hydrologic studies, we go out for any study, any RFPs.
You probably have, Fred, my conversation with Vanessa was early last week or even late the week prior, I don't remember now. If you talked to them Thursday, they were in the process to figure out, and DOE trying to figure out what exists the $50,000 for.
Mhm.
They weren't, other than to defray costs of getting ready to do the watershed plan revisions. Okay, let's string this all together then. If we take, well, first,
We have
foundation.
several things. GIS mapping that we can pay for, GIS time that we can pay for specifically tied to that. Any of that one person's time tied to this RIA.
Well, the 60,000, that'll be easy enough to morph. What I'll do is what I had was had it phased in terms of completing the different layers of work. What I'll do is just use that, but I'll essentially cut it in half now. And first phase, if you will be to complete all those layers of work, 49. That'll be with whatever's left over. Now we can make that work from the viewpoint. 49, obviously, the mission is entirely different. 48, mostly what we're doing is coming up with our countywide tracking system, which we can then lay against the reserve, know how much water we've got left, where it is, tweak your zoning to match up with that. That's a whole different discussion up there. Over here, we still have to generate our water projections. We have to try to assess current use, future use, all that sort of stuff, and we're starting much farther behind than we are in. If the Watershed Council is doing whatever they're doing with Aspect and with their relationship with it, once we're done with 49, because this will be the creation of our foundation, our database, then it'll just be a question of picking up what they have, trying to make it talk to what we've done, or just integrate the data into what we've now created,
Exactly.
freshen it up, and away we go. So we can make that work. We can make that work if that's the direction the commissioners are interested in taking. Okay, fair enough. Then what I'll do, I'll tear back it. You were part of that one discussion several weeks ago where DOE was a little bit concerned that I pinned down the timelines.
Right.
And work product to execution, maybe a little too tight. I'll just tear into it and draw the vertical line between the two RIAs. Tweak those delivery dates to accept some phasing between the two and resubmit that. They were still working on their scope of work anyway.
Right.
So I don't think they were waiting for anything to come up with that, for the well tracking grant, now I'm talking.
So Vanessa did ask that, because that's why I went in on Sunday to look at that database and the different things that were contained within it, to try to, this week, early sometime, kind of get those things hammered out so we know we're not overlapping, and so we're, she can get the kind of scopes of work.
Okay.
And she would assist in that.
Okay.
So
All right.
if you want to contact her, let her know that the commissioners and you've had the discussion, we've talked with the Watershed Council, we're kind of more from the direction that we're going to go
Okay.
a little bit to make sure that it's not overlapping money, that we're actually doing separate work together.
Okay.
I think that she could probably.
Yeah, no, we can make that work. We can make that work. Well, then at this, maybe premature to try to tap in to any other money at this point. I mean, we can come up with
Well,
something.
but we have to start, we have to apply for, the
Save.
50,000, I think, we have, no.
Well, no, the 60,000, we already have our application in.
Right.
50,000, I've just been waiting for her to tell me how to apply, in
Right.
essence. The 150, I get the impression is earmarked once they figure out how
Oh, it
they're
was the
gonna get.
project money that was
The
from
project money
October
we're
1st to October 31st,
Yeah,
I think.
we're coming
the
on a
project
deadline.
money.
So, I mean, I could try to put together something relatively generic in terms of the work that I think we're gonna end up having to do in 49 and send it in. And all they do is tell us no. We'd have to, we need to make sure that we have it structured internally so we properly administer the grant. So we don't run afoul of the auditor's office, working on that.
So right now, we're talking about $60,000 for the well tracking,
Which we've already applied
which we've
for.
already applied for. $50,000 of local capacity to help offset our county costs, plus possibly look at, some water studies.
Right.
And then the project dollars, we would have to have either water identified, whatever came about with, OTID's water bank, did they say that they couldn't actually sell
I think it was
water?
kind of left in limbo, wasn't it? We threw that.
Well, I sent that email from
I got the email.
their attorney. And,
We-
I interpreted that as they've essentially abandoned the discussion. Now, and actually, I probably should have put that on the agenda for today, whatever drove the sense of urgency. They had this obvious notion that they needed to get that $10,000 commitment to move ahead with applying for the money. We inserted kind of an additional step in that we were gonna sign the letter of intent, but we wanted to see the intergovernmental agreement, so we knew what the $10,000 was going for. If I interpreted the email response to, you recall I did some draft, made some additions to the letter of intent, their board walked away from it, is my interpretation of the status of the proposal at this point. Now, whether they're still going to work on water banking or what, I don't know, I haven't had that discussion.
So was there a so the first conversation that we had with when Aspect was in here, and then was there a follow-up conversation that when I was gone on a Tuesday, did they come back in?
They didn't come back in, we had a conference call.
Okay, so did they clarify whether they could sell us water or not?
They don't wanna sell the water.
No, but they were gonna
That-
lease it.
Okay, but that's an interruptible right.
Well, the discussion, and then we kind of morphed the discussion from a lease to a long-term water service agreement that would have essentially an escape route only if water was to replace what they were providing. I mean, they Aspect thought that it could be made to work. Apparently, there's other water banks that are working with long-term leased water, with provisions of that nature in the agreements. I haven't seen them, I don't know, but that was their statement. The deal killers seem to be, they want you to commit your $10,000, and we weren't quite ready to do that without seeing where it would go, and apparently that wasn't acceptable. Now, what work they're doing on their own, I don't know.
Yeah, it was kind of like a down payment for a car I haven't really.
Yeah,
taken a
Yeah,
look at.
yeah, it could be a Porsche, or it could be a.
Earnest money, I guess is how I kind of came to look at it.
I think Aspect was pushing the buttons from everything that I can read between the lines, and that's where they got the sense of urgency. But then when we said, hey, we want a little bit more assurance here, they all
Well, that, I mean, that was,
Whatever it may be, I think you're exactly right in the fact that why not put a down payment on something you have no idea what it looks like yet.
do you want me to renew that conversation?
Not necessarily, I don't really like that, I mean, it devolves in their court. We did everything that,
Yeah, I mean, why would, I mean, they're gonna, you know, they're going to be able to long-term lease water. So they're gonna be able to generate revenue that they can't generate right now. But it still asks $10,000 down payment from us to basically make it work, and that's, I don't know.
Investment on our part to
It's like.
participate in their water tank. I mean, that's what we were trying to clarify.
Right, and that's not, I mean.
I mean, if I tracked it all correctly, and I may have, but what they were trying to avoid was being in the position to having to be in the position to do the individual transactions. They want you to do that, the county to do that. So they would have, you know, kind of think of it as the wholesaler versus the retailer. The wholesaler wanted to enter into an agreement with the retail chain, will provide you with 10,000 widgets for 99 years, and then they wanted the county to determine who bought the widgets and to administer all of that part of it. So-
I've never heard of a retailer though paying a wholesaler a pre-commission fee.
Well, that's
or
perhaps another discussion.
something like that, you know, I mean, that's exactly how I would see it work.
I had it.
Wholesaler wholesales a bulk amount of something to somebody who's going to then administer the retail end of it. But if you don't know if you can get the supply going, or you don't know if it's gonna actually work, then it's really tough to make that decision.
Our participation's important because there's something there that we can do that they can't do.
Obviously, the
Create policy.
water bank would make or break based upon people participating, and if you, as the regulatory body, didn't require people to obtain those mitigation credits from the bank to get a building permit or subdivide or whatever, I don't know too many, there may be some. The financial institutions may step in, some may fairly elect to do it for the greater level of certainty, but obviously there would be those who prefer not to pay the $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000, however it worked out, to get that credit. So obviously the success or failure would lean very heavily upon the regulatory framework in which it worked. Now, in Kittitas County is a wonderful example, because of the emergency rule and all of that, if you got a building permit in Upper Kittitas County, you bought credits from the water bank. Now, be it the private one or the county one, that is a different discussion, but,
I would say for a reasonable investment, we could have a water rights attorney look at what's being proposed and get a pretty good view of it. And I had the same situation come up, not exactly the same, obviously, but with, and not saying anything good, bad, or indifferent about Aspect, but we had an attorney offer us to actually review a contract in a similar manner, and he's a water rights attorney in the state of Washington, puts on seminars on it, to make a contract that we were actually entering into, in essence, with ecology, to make sure it was bulletproof before we actually made the move. And I mean, even if we spent $1,000 on that attorney to review what's being proposed,
I got another idea too. Let's just think about this, because you know what, Oroville's water, service area, it goes out into the county, correct?
well into the county.
Well into the
It's
county.
bigger than the city itself.
Okay, so do they have the infrastructure in place though, that could deliver water to their entire service area?
Yes.
Oh, they do right now.
Both sides of the lake. One side of it could have an infrastructure upgrade because the lines are small, but the other side's 12-inch water.
See that money would be specifically to mitigate, the 6091 money is specifically to mitigate for permanent exempt wells.
Mhm.
So you could actually use it for infrastructure projects where a city had an existing water right that would service county parcels where there would then no longer well needed because it was being serviced from a city water right.
They can still, in that whole area too, drill exempt wells. They haven't had much luck in certain areas, and they spend a lot of money. Folks are-
So they don't have, they're not mandated to hook up to the water system?
You haven't adopted any regulation to that effect. We strongly recommend it for your subdivision application. And so far, the ones we've seen, all have elected to do so, at least in recent history. But it's not a requirement.
I recall a couple of them that, I mean, in one area, the guy just flat didn't wanna pay the system developer fees to hook up. And he spent nearly equal that drilling a well that didn't pan out. And they had to come and pay the system developer fees of $60,000. It would've helped him if he had a rule in place that he couldn't drill it.
So I guess those are ideas right now where if Okanogan, Omak, Tonasket, Oroville, Twist, you know, if they have, if we have county parcels that they can service under their current water rights, we could actually apply for funds to create infrastructure to do that as long as it mitigated permanent exempt wells.
Right, and there's actually, just to add to that though, they have the infrastructure, the main line out there, but there's certain loops that, could be accomplished that it doesn't quite make that water, the main line accessible to down Thorndike Loop and down around, by Oroville, Oro Beach, all those guys in there. They haven't, you know, there's not been the laterals that run out that far, so those reserve, you know, that's what limits their development actually, is their ability to tie into those. That main
Like I
line.
said, it would put a lot of, you know, we would have to set policy that says, you know, in order for the, whatever it may be, for the greater good. I don't know if you could even.
Then it worked like a newcomer's agreement then.
Right, but I'm just thinking of parity and fairness and everything else, because if you're saying that you can still drill a well, you're not really mandated to hook up to something that's already there. You would have to, if you were to try to tie this money into that, you would have to create policy that says you have to hook up to this so that you can mitigate for.
Well, and then that goes with another policy, which is not, it's a policy of their system. They hook to the water of their system, they have to hook to that sewer system on East Lake.
Yep.
Not on West Lake.
Right.
So some of the cities, Okanogan, that now forbid drilling wells within the city limits. They obviously can't reach out in the expansion area. That may be something, we haven't, I mean, we've talked about the city expansion areas, but we really haven't done a tight review of the proposed language, well, the existing language in the 2014 plan or the proposed language of the new plan in terms of how to deal with water. Now, the alternatives I'm working on would open the door to a review of that kind of policy language in your city expansion areas. I mean, if it be the desire, especially if we tie it back to some money for infrastructure, concurrency, although a GMA thing, is still a very valuable thing to have on the
Yeah,
ground.
I mean, why have a city expansion area that's full of a bunch of permanent exempt wells,
Precisely.
if the city can service that area?
They have the water or could obtain the water. Some of the cities have actually shopped around for more water, they didn't have the money.
It would be, rather than, it would be their service area under the Department of Health, their water plant, right? Which typically will be the same as their city expansion area. But that would be a key piece of it, is that it's in their service area. Because they have a duty to serve in the service area.
Right.
And as long as you have the infrastructure available to do that.
Exactly, and most cities aren't gonna put in infrastructure just to put in infrastructure.
So, the duty to serve has come up there in conversation, and it has to do with, some of those that require 1,000 feet of line to get up there. We don't have that 1,000 feet of line, we'll serve you, that's the deal, if you run that line, it's on private property anyway, if you run that line or extend it. Some have taken that opportunity, others haven't been able to afford it just for one connection.
Right.
But that's a good one to look
Those
at.
are things that we have to think about. I mean, that's, again, the role of government is to help provide infrastructure and planning to,
And then on the water bank side of things too, is that I think that, I mean, with OTID, they're trying to protect what they have too, right? I mean,
To a point,
Yeah.
I guess. I think
because that's been
accurate.
a discussion for a long, I think. I have that in a spreadsheet.
so what is 30 divided by 24? I mean, that's, what,
65.
65 houses that you can mitigate for. That's a lot, I mean, that's,
Actually, yeah, I have a calculation for that in a spreadsheet I'll grab it and look at it for that particular area. We kind of.
I mean, if we're able to use money that is coming in, and we're mitigating for wells, and who knows, maybe with this water bank, we're not necessarily charging people. And if it's money that we got in, that didn't cost the county money,
Right.
and we're able to mitigate for permanent exempt wells based on, well, now a watershed plan that we have to complete. You know, maybe not charging people for that water is something that we think about. You know, we purchase it with funds to help to try to get this watershed plan in place.
Okay, I appreciate the discussion. I think what I'll do is tweak our well tracking grant application and use that as the vehicle for our next tier of discussion. What I'll do again is separate phases, 49, 48 tier in terms of how we would go about the work. I'll call Vanessa either today or tomorrow and kind of outline where we're going, which should assuage her concerns about replication of effort in 48. Then in terms of what additional work to do in the Tunk, maybe because of the tight timeline, I'll mess around with it and see if I come up with something that sounds compelling in terms of money for the thing to do. But let me run that out. I'll put it in the form of a memo and put it in front of the
Is well
commission.
tracking on this?
Pardon?
The well tracking data, have you started to record it like?
We could, right now it's still buried in our site analysis application. We were tracking availability applications back in the old
Well,
county
yeah,
days.
you've got water, have they got water availability?
But they're not applying for that now,
Right.
because we repealed that portion of 20.
Yeah.
So it's now buried in our site analysis. We need to finish our work laying down our foundation for the well tracking system, so we can start walking that information over into it.
I'm talking with the assessor, they have a well code too, I don't know that, Gene has to know that. They have a code apparently, where when they go out and do a reevaluation or whatever, and they see well, they code that, so.
Okay.
But because of the assessor, if somehow we could run the report that ecology needs that just has parcel number and that it's there's a house on it, it's using water. And they said, well, there's so many different codes, like you could have a 88 code, there might be a house on it. But he did say that there is a well code.
We can chat. I think what we'll find, my opinion, once we get the project off and running, once we get our grant, once we get geared up and ready to go, we're gonna see a tremendous burst of progress as we just more or less pull together all the information that we already have and feed it into our tracking database. then we'll be getting, skim the cream, if you will. Once we get past that, then it's gonna be the reconciliation of the well logs and those sorts of things, which will be slower, and then, of course, once we run out of those, it will be, as we try to figure out what everyone's water source is. I mean, we'll have to reconcile the water out, things that we know we need to do. So we'll get bogged down a little bit there towards the end, which is fine. I mean, I'm anticipating that, so that's will unfold. But we'll focus in 49, do a completed project there, and then pick up, and we'll mesh whatever we still need to do with whatever aspect has done under the banner of the Watershed Council grant. And then I think what we'll find is we're at essentially that same point where you're bogged down and begin to do that field work. So let me adjust all of those documents, and then I'll run it past you again, so we can see what's going on. I'll call them and work on that. So if you're ready, let's move to Cannabis Operations. We have Planning Commission meets tonight. I did not revise any documents for them, so all I'm gonna do, I have heard from now 4 of the Cannabis Advisory Committee members. They would like, well, I guess I just sort of heard from you, I guess. Yeah. Intervene if I'm saying something. They wanna pick it back up. The one member I haven't heard from, in terms of those are all industry members. In terms of the non-industry members, keeping in mind there were 5 on each side, if you will. I've heard from one who's very interested in picking it back up. One's gone. One only attended 1 meeting through the course of the previous process. 2 I haven't heard from. So, question in front of the commissioners is whether you want me to try to repopulate those empty spaces, move ahead with what I have.
No, because it'd be like starting all over.
I have thoughts.
We do not need to start all
I have thoughts that the commissioners would like to hear them, but
Yeah, I would.
I say we move with what we've got. We know what the issues are. We know where, if you will, the loggerhead was. Whether we'll break that at the advisory committee level, I don't know. From there, it'll go to the planning commission. Obviously, from there, it'll come to you. The issues that you enumerated that you want us to work on, I think some we can fix. The light, I think, is fairly simple to fix. I think we need to talk a little bit more about the traffic, because I'm still queuing back to what we heard. What we heard was they drive down the middle of the road and wear hoodies. Well, I can't mitigate that through traffic impacts. More of the issue is if you're concerned about too much traffic in and out, you put a restriction on the size of the operation or where it can be located in relation to whatever county road you're on. I mean, that, unless you require complete road improvements and whatnot, which is many times impractical.
So let's discuss something about that just real. Let's take Benson Creek Road for just as an example, because I think it's a good example.
Mm-hmm.
Benson Creek is a county road, a 2-lane county road. It's fairly windy, doesn't have a lot of shoulder on it. And designed for, there was no commercial zoning.
They were farms.
Yeah, they were just simply farms. Okay.
Farms have farm equipment.
Farms have farm equipment and stuff like that, exactly, that's right. So you got slow-moving vehicles, you got things like that. And now you have an industry there that requires, more traffic.
Mm-hmm.
In general, I remember, I think we went through a CUP and we had to, project our traffic, issues and things like that. Does that go on with cannabis operations? Do they have to project their traffic flow and all those things?
When we were doing the CUPs, there'd be some effort to do that. What we found, for instance, the operation in Malott, when they actually, once we got past the rhetoric, I'm gonna employ millions of people and change the dynamics of the world economy and the neighbors concerned, you'd have 50 trucks in and out a day dropping off product. Once we got past all of that and actually identified what was likely to happen, it was inconsequential. We were talking about a delivery van in the morning and a delivery van out at night and 3 to 5 employees.
That's not what I see. I don't see it. I see, like I said, I mean, you look at some of these farms, I mean, they talk about the number of people that they employ.
Well, I know, but the number, I understand that, and maybe they're right. I think what we're gonna find is most of the time, you don't have that many people there. Now, they may be going back and forth all day long, I don't know. And during harvest, or in particular short times of the year, I think you have an expanded crew.
What about processing though that goes on right at?
There's a processor right here. How many people you
Yeah,
gotta
we do
work?
both.
How many people you gotta work for?
I have two full-time processors. You're right. And then I have one person working at, and my wife. And we have no intentions of hiring more than 5 or 6 people to do harvest, and that takes 30 days. And then we're back down to the processing.
Okay, but so that's his operation.
Yeah.
And that's great. But how do we double check somebody doesn't go, yeah, I plan on employing, 20 people.
There you may need to, I mean, if we want to try to get to that kind of issue, when you do it, the perfect world, you do it in those areas where you have a structure, where you have the infrastructure in place to handle that level of traffic. The next best thing is you create your CUP, your site-specific analysis, to determine based on what they want to do, if the infrastructure will support it. And we've done that before.
That's all I'm asking.
Not for marijuana per se, but a good example would be the wedding venue off Bean Road or whatever it was. One of the things that tripped it up is the size and number of events, the little local, it was a private road, true or no, not the point of perception, and eventually the compelling argument wouldn't support that. So they had to scale way back, and they got into other problems in terms of the actual legal right to use it, but pushing that aside, they got hit because the county road would deal with it. The little private road down to it was a different discussion. We ran into the same issue with the no pause, you recall. That became a real stumbling block in terms of whether they got into the legal issue too, but prior to that, whether that level of traffic going in and out.
This discussion we're having is not an anomaly that affects cannabis.
Unique to marijuana, we have this.
Because I can remember years and years ago, if a log loader went through Concanelli on a Sunday afternoon, people would see, well, they're gonna be hauling logs. Before one log was hauled, there would be 10 complaints of logging trucks speeding through Concanelli at the Forest Service, at the sheriff's office. So everybody, and the no pause deal, that was a conflict with.
Well, so
that
then
road's a driveway.
what do you think then? Do you think that we should, because the traffic thing I actually brought up,
Right.
because,
We didn't do what Mr. Zittle was more concerned about was buffers, did we?
Mhm.
We discussed it, but we didn't.
Well, odor. You included odor and then what would constitute a reasonable intrusion. And I interpreted that as we either discussed time of year or duration.
Right.
George's approach was distance. His theory, and he probably has a point to a point. His idea was just farther away, the less opportunity you have to smell it. Right or wrong, again, not my point, but that was his approach. Back to
But I
the
think
traffic.
his also testimony tied into your concern with traffic also. I think
because
there's
he
a
said he saw.
multifaceted
Yeah.
little situation.
One of the ways that you can deal with traffic is, there's one, you zone it in places where the traffic doesn't matter. Set up for that kind of traffic. 2, your site-specific review to determine what they want to locate on, what class of road it is, what's already ADT. The other is to restrict the size of the operation. I mean, on that 80,000 foot of canopy needs more people than 40,000 foot of canopy. That also came up under the banner of odor. 10,000 square feet's one thing, 40,000 another, 80,000 yet another in terms of odor impacts. There are different ways you could approach that.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not trying to zone it out or anything like that. I'm
No,
just saying that there's these,
understood.
and it would be with any light industry, anything that require, orchards are, they brought up, well, orchards have a lot of people that, park on the side of the road. But that may be true, but they're not there all year round most of the time. Most of the time you come in, you harvest, and then you're out.
Well, there's thinning, and then there's
I know,
pruning, and
I know.
there's, it's year round, you got activity in the orchard.
But have you ever had any complaints about, well, we have, a whole bunch
No,
of.
because people are used to it.
That may be. And so I guess with the whole traffic thing, or is it just that we, if you're going to put a processing plant in for marijuana and you have, 30,000 square foot permits there, does the amount of traffic warrant a check if it's been a,
I think one thing we can do, how to say this, there's always the numbers and there's always the perception. If you live on a road where nobody ever drove it, and then all of a sudden 5 people are going in the morning and leaving at night, well, okay, your traffic has increased,
Right.
but it's still only 5 cars. So we have to kind of define what would be our unit of measurement. Because ADTs on a county road, unless it's already incredibly stressed, will never exceed the numbers to actually degrade your classification. We've done that exercise with subdivisions and salvage yards and all sorts of stuff. And from that unit of measurement, there's no impact. You're still well under you might improve your entry apron or something like that. But even with Veranda Beach, with 100 and whatever cottages they have in place now, if you actually lay it against the level of service class on East Lake Road, it's still just fine. But the perception at times of the year, and then probably rightfully so, as the traffic has increased exponentially, because you have, a whole bunch of just kind of up on the end of the road, so you're going back and forth. What we can do is, to get to my point, what we can do is try to assess the actual number, because it's all tied to employees, obviously. I don't think the actual service trucks or pickup trucks or whatever is the issue. I think it's employees. Figure out how many actual employees these are. And we have some, comparatively speaking, fairly good sized operations. We can get those numbers. See how many employees they actually have. So lay those numbers on the ground, and then we can figure out what the habits employees are. If you only have 5 employees, but they're constantly running back and forth to town for whatever reason, you can have the perception of 50 employees, but you still only have 5. I think if we try to actually frame the numbers, then we can at least make an educated guess as to whether they're actual hard measurable traffic impacts or whether it's the perception. To the commissioner's point, we don't like logging trucks rolling through Concanelli, so when we think we're going to have some, we're upset about it. So we can try to do that actual analytical work, if you will. And the advisory committee is in a good spot to do that, arguably.
There was other testimony that I heard, or comments, whatever you want to call it, from the advisory committee, where it sounded like they had some good ideas, like with if you had to own 5, even if you were in R1, you had to own 5 acres in order to, put something in, but I didn't ever see that get.
Well, we talked about that. It all came down to distance. We got hit higher you will, on distance, an acre, put yourself in the middle of it, that works. Works better. If you have 5 acres, but you're up against county road, then the other 4.35 acres back behind you doesn't accomplish anything. So, I mean, and George, this was George's point, it was a very simple point. He didn't care about lot size, he didn't care about anything else. He just wanted a simple measurement from the closest house.
You can't do that.
If you were, well, I said we got high-centered, but the point was, in his mind, if you're far enough away from your neighbor, stuff won't matter. And then the advisory, again, not right, not wrong, not my point, but the other members found that impractical.
I mean, it is impractical. I see the only practicality of being, if you got a dense, like Jeremy said, do you want overlays? Do you want, a place where you say, yeah, no, you cannot put it in this sphere or the circle at all?
And we batted that around too. In fact, we started down that road. We actually had the map in front of us, and we were trying to identify areas through zoning, where they just wouldn't be allowed. The problem, it would have had to been an overlay, because we don't have that many zones in Okanogan County. R1, R5, R20 is essentially what we have on the ground. So it would have been
Its own overlay.
It would have been impractical to say, okay, R1.
Right.
Because there's stretches of R1 that are all 20-acre lots. Which is why we eventually morphed into the whole density definitions. The idea being, irregardless of the zone, we're just not gonna put these things in where there's already a bunch of people. Now, keeping in mind, a lot of the discussion still revolves around the legal pre-existing. Benson Creek's been there since the very early stages of this thing. So, we still have that kind of outstanding. And the committee, nor anyone else at this point, has elected to reach back in time with an amortization schedule, except on some of the issues that they thought were important enough to do that, your lighting, your fencing, those sorts of things.
Under the zoning that we had in the interim control, what would Benson Creek look like?
I'm sorry, Commissioner?
Under the interim control that we have in place now, if somebody applied at Benson Creek new, if that was a new use, what would that have looked like? It just...
Well, the only change in your current interim controls is now it's a conditional use permit in R1 and R5. And,
in the Met Review District.
Hmm?
In the Met Review District.
R1 and R5?
And the Met Review District. No, the R1 zone, R5 zone, and the Met Review District.
Oh, right.
Are a conditional use permit for grows. So then, and there, even that's, keeping in mind, I don't advocate for either position. I'm looking for pitfalls in our process. If you designate something as a conditional use permit with the idea you're doing a site-specific review, that's what it's for. But you're still supposed to lay it against the framework of your regulation. If the neighbors don't complain, it will get you in trouble.
Exactly right. So, yeah, and the conditional use permit, in essence, is intended to be approved with conditions that mitigate.
The predisposition is it's allowed if you can mitigate whatever impacts would make it incompatible with the area.
And typically, the safest way to go with it is to have this criteria that you're trying to fulfill so that you're fairly dealing with every conditional use permit, because of the crowd that shows up in the room should not be what.
Guides your policy.
So for instance, if CUP R1, someone applies and it's in an area or definition of high density, you wouldn't, because we're not supposed to allow it now, but you wouldn't allow it. To go to the next step, somebody applies, but it's in proximity to the high density area, and the nature of the topography, the land settlement pattern, what's on the other side, would lend one to conclude that too is likely to be a high density area. So you turn it down, you're probably on good ground there. If if it becomes a beauty contest, you're on a slippery slope. And that's always my concern when we go to a conditional use permit for site-specific review without a fairly strong matrix behind that.
Yes,
So,
there's probably more
I-
land use cases over conditional use permits than maybe
I'd be interested to see what the cannabis committee, without, even without, you know, folks from the other side, heard everything that we're battling with, we're concerned about. Just what they come up with as a recommendation to, and I would like to see their recommendation to the planning commission.
okay. We're meeting on the 3rd. I've already set up a meeting of the advisory, we invited all members, whoever shows is who we'll work with, for the 3rd of October. I'm gonna just update the planning commission tonight in terms of the advice, and then, you recall I reported out, the planning commission said, well, if they want to pick, they didn't remand it back to them, but they said if they want to pick it back up, that's fine by us. So I will report to the planning commission, advisory committee wants to take another look at it. And
Are they gonna meet with the planning commission and discuss that, or are they gonna discuss and kind of give it?
well, we can chat about that
Yeah,
tonight.
'cause
If the planning commission wants to sit down with them, there's nothing to make that a
I
problem.
think they should.
I'll talk to the planning commission tonight, talk to the advisory committee on the 3rd. We can always put together a workshop between the two.
Yeah, because the planning commission is making recommendations. And so in hearing the discussion, instead of just getting a list of, hey, this is what,
Not fair enough.
this or fix.
That's probably a good idea. We can put it together as, like, say, as a workshop. Everybody sit down and hammer it out.
Yeah, and then actually the packets for consideration for zoning, I don't remember if they had, that recommendation wasn't in the packet for us.
Well, with the minutes and all that stuff, it was discussed.
Yeah.
They kind of walked away from the idea of trying to identify with the zones that we had. They came up with the overlay idea. Well, okay, I'll say planning commissions tonight, advisory committee meets on the 3rd. We'll, see if they wanna get together. And we have to talk about, the winter schedule for the planning commissions always has to be morphed anyway, cause we got Thanksgiving, that generally falls, that week falls on their meeting, Christmas, all that stuff, so we gotta move the dates around, so I'll see if they wanna meet, and come up with something. I mean, the recommendation that you will see will come from the planning commission, but working theoretically in conjunction with the advisory committee, so.
Yeah, that, concerning thing was that the folks came here for the testimony, not knowing what to testify about, to know what they were supposed to be coming.
Well, what the old saying, it's not over till it's over. And the very last thing is a public hearing where we decide the actual policy that has gone through, advisory group as a recommendation to a planning commission that then muddles it, or not muddles it, but, morphs it or looks at it and then gives us a recommendation. And there's nobody here to testify on the actual recommendation that we just got.
That's
It's
the,
really difficult.
that's the good part, is that it is legislative. Okay.
Okay, I have a course of action in mind. Commissioners, with your indulgence, let me skip to the first item on,
Planning commission.
We're just looking at our agenda and seeing if we missed something.
not exactly, but that's what I'm talking about. We're gonna skip to the first item on your administrative agenda, which is the Champerty Shores sewerage. Josh and Ben are here to keep an eye on things, just,
You mean to make sure that we don't, tell them that they have to do something?
well, you never know, what, trust but verify. Would you pull up that map you had? What we have, and of course, commissioners know the Champerty Shores, settlement, if you will, up on, the north end of the East Lake corridor is
Sounds like a
required,
colony.
I'm sorry?
A colony.
Okay, there you go, is, required to hook to the sewer system, because they have city water. They have been working on that. They have, as I understand the last progress report, they have their easements in place. They were beginning to work on the engineering and cost estimates. You know, they're doing this as they can, obviously. They have the assistance of Mr. Pekka, and Dirting is an attorney they hired to help them through some of this. What has happened is a fellow by the name of Barker on the property highlighted in yellow. If you, I don't have my pointer, up north of that, working around that point, that's Champerty Shores. All of the, there you go, so go down to Veranda Beach. That's Veranda Beach, that's where the lift station is, Champerty to the north. So what they're working on is going from Champerty Shores collection vault, I'll call it, down to Veranda Beach's lift station. The land in yellow, a person is working on a subdivision proposal. And he's a developer. He is working on the engineering, and it will be, he's pretty much at the mid in terms of between what will be a pressure system from Champerty Shores versus gravity flow from his property down to Veranda Beach. He has offered to do the engineering for the whole line. Now, I have communicated that to Mr. Lawrence. In fact, he's talked to Bob about that. So what I am anticipating in the not too distant future is a good cost estimate for the entire line, from Champerty Shores down to the Veranda Beach lifts. Champerty Shores, of course, is willing to do it when they can do it. Mr. Barker is in much more of a hurry. So that
Much more of what?
of a hurry.
Okay.
That brings then the question of, because the commissioners have at least been willing to talk about a bond issue to capitalize this thing, and either forming an SID to pay it off, or we still haven't put a real fine point on the discussion with Oroville, whether they would be willing to do it just as a utility, a revenue bond, and collect the debt service through essentially the monthly utility bill. So, what, we got a lot of things to talk about. If we do an SID, then obviously we will be in charge, the county will be in charge of the project, which is why the gentlemen behind me are present today. If Oroville does it, then they could certainly supervise the project out of the utility department. Either way, if it's public funding, then you know, you're gonna be prevailing wage, you're gonna have all of those sorts of requirements imposed in the system. Champerty Shores knows that, but they just arguably can't capitalize the project, and they don't go to the bank and borrow money to do that kind of stuff, so they would need the bond issue. Now, what I don't know, and we'll find out in short order, is if you subtract the gravity flow from the yellow property down to Veranda Beach, and now you're talking about the pressure system up to Champerty Shores, how much difference that makes in terms of what Champerty Shores would look at having to capitalize. So, I mean, it's at least not impossible that a bond issue may not be necessary. If we get that number down far enough that Champerty Shores can write a check, so to speak. So I've got Mr. Pekka coming up with the construction cost estimates, prevailing wage, yes, prevailing wage, no. And when I get that, it would be my suggestion, unless Champerty Shores Homeowners Association just says, nah, we'll just pay for it, in which case we'll let them go on about their business. If they can't do that, I would suggest we get City of Oroville, we get Public Works. It wouldn't hurt to contact the landowners that would be likely involved in this, if that's the direction you go, and begin to hash all this out. I talked to the treasurer last week. She didn't have any problem with the bond issue. We have plenty of capacity in our debt ceiling. and all of that. Of course, he was very concerned that it would have a kind of squishy debt service system in place, such as the Rand Beach East Lake Sewer Extension has. I sure heard that that was not, at least if anyone listens to me, that's not the way we would approach it. You'd either have an SID with a defined annual assessment to do debt service, or Oroville as a utility pulling in the money through their monthly rate structure. You have most of the larger parcels looking to the right is in single ownership. The ones that are on the route with the easements in place, they already would then have access to the system. It would be obvious candidates for an inclusion in an SID. No one at this point has volunteered to pay for the whole thing and recapture their investment through lake coast, although that's arguably an option. So what I wanted to do today is to just get this back on the front burner, because I assume things will start moving fairly quickly now. We will get a good, relatively precise cost estimate from Mr. Pecca. And Mr. Barker is actually beginning, well, he's already authorized the design work to do the whole thing.
So let's take Champerty Shores out of the equation, and you got a home or a property owner in there that wants to subdivide, that has to hook up to the system, is that true?
It's your policy at this point, that, and when I say you, the county's policy, although that said, hold that thought, I'll come back to it. That if there's any way humanly possible, you will hook to the system. Now, there are some things that can make that problematic. If you have intervening ownership and the intervening owner just refuses to do it, the commissioners have expressed a pretty consistent reluctance to do a condemnation or something like that to force it, although that is an option. Other than that, if you want to subdivide, you hook to the system. Has been the policy for several years now.
So the person in yellow would be on the hook to connect down to the system on a gravity fee possibly.
Right.
And pay for that.
Which he's doing.
And
Right,
if-
right.
And if they would have built the system already, he would have been on for, he would have had to.
What if, and this is where I'm glad he has come in and is talking about it, because we can avoid the problems you can otherwise get into. If he sizes it for his 8 lots, that's one thing, and that's a problem, because now we'd be talking about Commissioner Branch's off-made point, you get that spaghetti structure in the ground thing going. What we'll do is oversize his to handle everything from Champerty Shores and the surrounding areas. Now, he'll work and has started that discussion with the city of Oroville to see what that should look like. So what he would be certainly eligible for in terms of late comers fees would be the difference
Yep.
between what he would have had to do anyway versus doing to facilitate the rest of the system.
That line would be built to handle the capacity regardless of whether he was involved or not from there on down, right? I mean, that line will.
Well, it should, but unless somebody makes him, I mean, he's willing to do it because he gets it. Unless
We're just
somebody,
talking about
No, I mean the whole line.
unless somebody, I mean, the reality is, as you,
If Champerty does the line, it's gotta
be big.
well, say it.
But-
It's not huge.
But I guess what I'm saying, I'm trying to figure out, okay, who pays what amount, you know, and what kind of then assistance, and why, you know, why do we need to assist by doing bond? Or, I mean, tomorrow we got the DOE's water quality people coming in, you know, and they're talking about those grants that they have for water quality. I mean, is that
I'm
possible?
sure nobody would balk if we could get a grant for the whole thing.
Or loan even.
Or a loan.
Or loan, I mean, instead of us bonding money, you know, as a,
I mean, the Public Works Trust Fund would actually have been a likely candidate for this sort of thing, except they still sweep the money every year. So,
There is no money there.
you know, how we finance it, or even if we finance
That's why
it.
I said it, I told Scott Hustle, if you guys wanna start a rebellion so that they quit sweeping that public works trust fund every year, Okanogan County will be the first volunteer to quit making payments back to the public works trust fund.
I don't even wanna go talk to them.
So I think that we're talking chicken and an egg a little bit. To
Yeah.
Commissioner's point, if Champerty Shores builds it first, obviously it'll be sized for everything all the way down. The guy in the middle, had he just done it and no one paid any attention, you could find yourself in the scenario where he has a line just to
Right.
take care of his, and he goes past that one, and of course, we're now ahead of that, so we're avoiding that. Like I say, he gets it, so he's fully aware that that would be a foolish thing to do. You know, when you got a hole open, put what you need to in it, and then go on about your business. So we actually have a cooperative developer, motivated people up to the northwest, so it's kind of an opportunity, if you will, if we move with some precision. So, once I get the cost estimates, and we'll have a picture of what we gotta look at, we'll figure he's gonna pay for, that he would have had to do anyway, we'll figure out what then is in addition to that. We can begin to look at the parcels. The decision, if you do an SID, will be the same as all the other special districts you talked about. Will the property benefit by its inclusion in the district? Well, obviously, if you can take the line and stub out the property lines, then they will benefit by that inclusion. So,
so. I was gonna ask Josh, you're here just to make sure we don't make any decisions that would,
I'm just curious to see what it is. Would be a fairly straightforward project,
yeah,
but
The only, I think one of the big deals there with that project was when they did water on it too, is they're working in the water. They were working in the water.
a lot of
Yeah, yeah.
groundwater,
Huh?
groundwater.
Yeah.
yeah.
I know that they rode pretty well.
Have you done a site analysis on the yellow property?
no. He's in it, he hadn't even applied yet. He's in his fledgling stage. Like I say, to his credit, he understands the different issues. He's been in contact with the city. He knew about the Champerty Shores issue. He has contacted them. He's already in contact with Miranda Beach, so he's getting lined up. So I mean, we haven't done the assessment. The number I heard was 8 lots, which would actually be under what he could arguably do with the zoning now in place. We haven't done the critical areas assessment or anything.
So basically, the next thing that we need is the cost.
Cost
Try to
estimates.
figure out which direction to move.
Estimates, well, the very first question I'll pose, once we get those in hand, especially with the breakout, prevailing wage yes, prevailing wage no, if now with the other half being capitalized, at least in part by someone else, is that low enough that Champerty Shores Homeowners Association could write the check and do their own collections internally?
Correct.
If that's the case, we're done.
Yeah.
City of Oroville will supervise the construction to make sure it's done in accordance with their system
I think-
requirements.
Or.
We do the
or-
permitting.
Or would that loan program give them a long enough period to, instead of just writing, you know, like I said, just write, I mean, I guess that's the same thing, you're gonna go out for.
I mean, they're still paying, if it's any kind of public
How does
money,
how do they finance, how does a private organization like that finance infrastructure project like that?
I gotta believe it's a tough road to hoe.
Yeah, just cash, basically. So I guess what I'm saying is that if this loan program, which is, it seems like it's designed for something like that, allows them to actually finance something like that, maybe that'll work too.
Well, it'd be less complicated. I mean, their point is, when they paid for the water line, and they all wrote checks for that. Well, their concern was the sewer would be a lot more, And, you know, not everybody in Champerty Shores has the same income levels. They were concerned that they couldn't write a check for the sewer extension. So you don't go to the bank and borrow for stuff like that. So the next best thing would be some kind of assistance from the county. Well, the best way to do that would be a bond issue. Now, whether the county does it, the city does it, doesn't matter. The bond issue pays for it, then the landowners that benefit pay back.
Yeah, and I'm not putting any bets on that technology grant program for that, because it's for development, part of it.
I mean, you know, to the discussion, if it were feasible, you just scratch out bond issue, write in loan.
Yeah.
And everything else
That
is
was
the same.
East Lake project.
So, say what's different now is we actually have somebody doing something.
Yes.
In addition to Champerty Shores. Before, all the landowners were kinda interested, mostly in water, they didn't necessarily want the sewer, but it's a bundled deal, so we have momentum up, I guess is the best way to say it. So if we have decisions, now's a wonderful time to do it, when we're gonna get some good hard numbers, and we actually have somebody working on designing the system.
And that's Lakecomer area for Veranda Beach too, right?
I do believe that is correct, yes, to hook into that lift station, there's some latecomers fees that would be part of it. I mean, when we do the whole project, that was what, I talked to Tim the other day, I told him everything, construction costs, permitting fees estimates, all of your system collection fees, county, city, everything. Give me the whole package, so.
Is there a latecomers agreement for Veranda Beach? I don't remember there ever being one.
Well, I don't think there's,
I
there's
think
a
it includes that
deal.
whole section right. That whole area referred to.
I know it was discussed a long time ago, but I've never seen an actual agreement.
There's definitely one on the water system.
Yeah.
And I just,
I think the sewer system has it too.
yeah, I.
Well, I don't know, I mean, unless there's one buried in that, and we talked about this the other day, unless there's one buried in the one development agreement back then that the county did with them, the three-way agreement between the city, county, and Veranda Beach never happened.
No,
Now,
but
whether they have another agreement with Oroville, I don't
They
know.
have one on the water system. It just seemed like they really pushed the issue for sewer, but that was your deal then.
Yeah, I mean, if there is one, we probably need to review it, because a lot of times a latecomers agreement will have, a time period on it, 20 years, which would go back to, what was it, 2005?
I think they put, in fact, I think, didn't the legislature even change 15?
I thought it was 20 when Veranda Beach went through.
But by the time they got done, we'll just have to check and see, just speculate.
So the objective in the discussion today was, one, are the commissioners still willing to entertain a bond issue if it comes to that? And it sounded like the answer is yes. The treasurer is okay with it as long as there's an identified debt service source.
Would we be proposing to Oroville that they collect it and pay us, or in their utility system?
Well,
Otherwise,
I
they pull it property tax system?
say my suggestion would be we go one way or the other. If Oroville issues a revenue bond through the utility, then they would collect the debt service through anyone identified in that improvement area would go on their monthly utility bill, whether they get service or not. They would pay a monthly fee. That would then collect up and do the annual debt service. Yeah, your bond issue generally an annual debt service. So it'd be all Oroville. If we do it, whatever that might be, and then you pull it in. Now, the only difference there, we just had a per parcel fee for the Lake Management District. Most of the time, my experience at least, on a local improvement district or a sewer improvement district, is based on assessed value. I mean, the idea is the more property, the proportionally more you pay. It doesn't always work that way, because the big house is more expensive than the big pasture. We'll have to work out those details as we move along. So once I get those estimates, my suggested next step is to get all the players in one room and hash this out.
Well,
Yes.
yeah. There was a bit of an upset with the adjacent property owners at the time. In, out, don't force me, that kind of thing.
And you'll get that now. I mean, nobody wants to pay anything till they're ready to develop.
Yeah,
It's the way it works, but,
but there was some interest in getting into the system. Actually, it was one of these characters up here, it's not two. We had a picture.
the footnote, or the bookmark, I should say, yeah, what, 4 or 5 years ago now, we actually created a resolution. It would have taken the shape of a joint resolution with Okanogan County and the city of Oroville, outlining the policies attached to this system. Many of the things in that resolution we now do anyway, but we never actually adopted the resolution. It would be my suggestion we dust that off and actually get something on paper in terms of what, we're doing it anyway. But if somebody came in and said, show me where I have to do that, I really don't have anything to show them. So, just an observation, if the commissioner's interested in picking that back up,
I'm absolutely interested in.
I still have all of those materials. It'd be a simple matter to put it back out in front of everybody.
And then maybe at the same time, we could address that issue with the franchise.
Right, yeah.
With the what? Franchise in there. Oh.
It was actually on that subject, we chatted about it the other day, you'll recall, well, this was back when Verlene was still working with the Public Works. We were trying to get a franchise agreement up with the city to work on the pipes in the county right of way. And of course, the city's response, I'm doing this a lot, but the city's response was the same pipe. Why do I need a franchise agreement? Of course, they work on the pipe, so more story we need to figure out by which, in the interim, keeping in mind, we still own the pipe until the debt's paid off, then the city gets the pipe. The typical franchise agreement necessarily fit really well, but I think we could, Josh had a desire to stay with a consistent form, which we could do. I don't see any issue with that. We could throw a one-page addendum on it or something to deal with the details surrounding the difference, but we probably need to pick that back up again too.
I fully agree that there needs to be a permit system for the city to work in the road whenever they need to work in the road, so that the county is aware and they accept the liability and so on and so forth. If something happens there, it was actually the big sticker was just the bill. Really, it was the bill for a franchise where the county owned the pipe. And they seem perfectly willing to go through a permit process because they understand what that's about in their own streets. But I didn't know that planner isn't there anymore, so we never know what.
Hard to say.
Might
Well, I
be-
mean, a
might
lot
be
of-
easier to get things done now.
I don't know.
A lot of faces have changed,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yes,
so.
yes, definitely.
Public Works
Public
director
Works.
different.
It's all across, the only holdout, I guess. So.
In the Public Works Department too, so it's a bit different world there too, I'm sure, so.
So we should probably pick that back up again as
Yeah.
well.
I think so, it's been a long time, I think we should have that in place.
Observations, gents, on anything?
We just wanted to be kept in the loop, and it's probably a good idea just for us to see what's going on with this. My my main concern that I brought up to Perry a while ago is that if you needed our assistance with going through, say, a formal bid process to hire a contractor, if the county's actually gonna be on that side of it, yet to be determined, then there would need to be some sort of revenue source to pay us, because we can't pay for it out of the, road fund. It would have to come from the general fund or some other type of mechanism.
Say, it'd come out of the bond.
Out of the bond.
Bond
Part of the
revenues,
cost of
it'd
the
be
project.
project
Along
management.
with the, system development fees, no, it'd come out of a levy shift.
Well, there we go.
Is that kind of like robbing Peter to pay Paul?
That was, I mean, on that.
Yeah, that does.
Well, we gotta have
I'm
a
just
sense of
curious to
humor.
see who would administer the contract, who's gonna inspect it. Obviously, it makes no sense for Public Works to have anything to do with the long-term maintenance of the project, but
Right.
it doesn't sound like that's the.
No,
goal, so.
actually, it seems like Public Works involvement in all of this would be very helpful in terms of bid stuff, everything, right? It's a missing element from the past.
I thought we were trying to reduce Public Works involvement in sewer systems.
Yeah.
The maintenance of them.
Yeah,
I mean, we're not there, it's an hour
No.
away, so anytime somebody gets a call to go maintain it, it's not very costly.
Even, I mean, reviewing engineering documents, bidding process,
I would see a higher priority to reduce the planning department's role
Yeah.
in public works projects as opposed to reducing public works' role in public works.
Oh, you're doing
projects.
fine, Perry.
That's just one man's opinion, mind you, perhaps only one man's opinion, but I thought I'd offer that up for the discussion. Anything on this subject? I'd say I'm waiting for my numbers now, and I'll throw together the next discussion.
Yeah.
I'll
and-
pick up that resolution again, and maybe we'll sit down and try to hammer out a one-page addendum to the usual franchise agreement.
Yeah, we can have a different set of conditions until the pipe becomes theirs.
Right, right, okay.
And I encourage the landowner to get his site analysis done before we go too far down the road.
Wouldn't hurt. We'll go ahead and pick it up. I mean, he hasn't applied for anything yet. He's been in and talked.
Just the analysis. is what I
Yeah.
was
Well, we can
concerned.
certainly look and see if there's any real immediate
I just,
challenges.
in the area, there has been, some issues with wetlands and. we better check it. That was part of I think that's part of that larger parcel that Quarter had, or Quarter had
To the
services.
south, that's
Yeah.
just directly to the south.
Okay.
Say that.
They ended up platting it and did, wetland work as part of the project. It's been years, so I
Yeah,
don't
so that's
remember the
just-
details.
Was the
Planning
old
department
Silly?
still has it.
Or Silly, however you say it. Pete.
I'm wondering if the Chile property was to the north, but
No, this is it.
this is it. So this one was slated to be developed at one time, so there's probably already something in the older
Okay.
file about it. I don't remember the name, but it was Ronna Chile and,
Oh, right, the Chile, CCLI or something like
Right.
that, that's right.
right, and he was one of, I think, 4 partners on the property.
Okay. It may be outside that. I know Ecology Shoreline had all kinds of things going on within their area. Actually, there was a wetlands delineation workshop.
Well, Commissioners, if we're prepared to leave that subject, why don't we go ahead and stay on our administrative agenda for the moment? I would ask you to convene as the Tonasket EMS governing body for purposes of vouchers.
Move to adjourn as the Okanogan Board of County Commissioners and reconvene as the Tonasket.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
The vouchers are your monthly contract payment.
Okay. I move to approve the voucher certification in the amount of $21,700 for payment for the August contract to Lifeline.
Second.
Motion second, discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all same sign. Motion carried.
you know, I don't remember if those guys ended, I would have certainly, if I was from Rand Beach, I would have gotten that latecomer, but it would have been through the county, given the latecomer agreement, right?
That would have been the better world. I just don't recall that I've seen one.
Move to adjourn as the Tonasket EMS District and reconvene as the Okanogan County Commissioners.
Second motion.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
You don't think it's the business of
EMS to know. Probably keep
They're
her,
interested.
keep her separated.
They're really interested. Maybe combining districts or something like that.
So I'll go through, we have all those documents, I'll go through and see if I can't find where that
Yeah.
might be. I don't think we've exercised it, at least in terms of the sewer system, because no one has as yet hooked into that lift station.
That's where, yeah,
And that's what would trigger it
That's
there.
right.
The
I don't
water,
think any-
I remember Hammond brought it up,
Yeah,
and might have been with Champerty Shores, but I don't recall that they hooked to anything in in terms of the water system that he had anything to do with. I don't remember now.
yeah, and I don't even know if I suppose they hooked into the water system. Well, they did, Champerty Shores, didn't they?
No.
They just said latecomer.
That jumped off of.
Yeah, they came.
I'll pull those. I need to look at them again anyways, since we're
Yeah.
talking about this. I'll take a look and see what we got. Before we go to the 49 discussion, commissioners, item 4 on your planning study session, Mr. Tovar is working with the Ruckelhaus Center on the Let's Streamline Growth Management project. And he has put together a meeting in Okanogan County. I assume he scheduled that through you, for the auditorium for October 18th. He's told everybody he has a meeting here on October 18th from 12:30 to 4:30, but,
Yeah,
What I have is, WSU, reservation on that day from 11.
well, I think Ruckelhaus Center operates out of WSU, don't they?
Yep.
So that's probably 12:30. $8:30, okay, well, he
I
shot
don't
big.
know if that's the time that they gave.
Okay, well, fair
but
enough.
That's what I have reserved.
I mean, he may have, the portion of it that I've put on your agenda is cities, counties,
yes, I saw.
municipal players, if you will, are invited to attend that.
Yep.
I just literally at 1:30 or so forwarded you an email that I sent to Mr. Tovar. He asked me and he gave me a variety of categories of groups and interests and things like that. He has asked me for some names and contact information for people that fit into those categories. So I did that, sent it to him last week. I forwarded it to you so you could see what I told him. I'm sure if other names or groups or whatever that kind of match up with these, if you think, yeah, there'd be some value in him inviting them to a meeting which is going to follow this one somewhere later in October, I don't know what the date is, then I'm sure he'd appreciate hearing from you. So at any rate, that's what that's all about. And then he came in and talked to, was it Quad County? I think it was Quad County. He came in and chatted with you all about what the Ruckelhaus Center was charged with doing.
He talked to us at the WASAC Legislative Steering Committee as well.
Okay.
Broke us up into groups and had conversation.
So anyway,
He actually left a message on my phone, and I had yet to talk with these guys, but it's been expedited to some degree, so that way, that's good.
he and I have chatted a fair amount about it, and we're not GMA, so
Yep.
how much skin we have in the game, I guess, is up for discussion, but he's still interested in what this part of the world has to say about it. And that may be it may be in anticipation. It's not every, it's pretty close, actually messes around with dropping a bill to force everybody into the Growth Management Act. And so far, nothing of that sort has come out of committee, but
Yeah, I haven't.
it does come up. So anyway, that's what the 18th is all about. I'll get some more details. We had that one flyer that came out, and it was a little odd trying to figure out who exactly he sent that to. But I'll forward it to you. You might already have it, but I'll forward it to you anyway. And
You know, I think that it's more of an effort to assess the good and bad and the ugly about the act. And certainly it would be helpful for them to consult with the partially planning counties as well.
I mean, we say we have adhered to part of it too, so
Yep.
it certainly wouldn't be a wasted effort. I'll
Well,
be curious to
if
see.
they came and asked you why you didn't opt in, you know, maybe they wanna know what.
I mean, I've been involved in now a couple discussions about the Growth Management Act in my time. Some nibbling around the edges with it as a result of some of those efforts. It'll be interesting to see what they come up with out of this, so.
Well, the initial conversation at the Wasatch Steering Committee was because we were broken up in groups, but you could hear what other groups were saying. And some of them were expressing their views quite loudly. So there you go. Those were in growth management.
Well, I mean, it has, the discussion generally let everybody opt out or, and then we all go home, so we'll see where that goes from there. Why don't you go ahead and pull up your 49 list, if you would, please. My hope of having our first meeting of the planning unit by the end of September is waning at a rapid pace. I'm still holding some hope for the first week in October, when Vanessa will be in town anyway. But irregardless of that, I do want to keep some momentum up. What Angie has put on the board, what I sent over to you, and what I'm handing to you now, essentially the progress made in terms of populating the deal that you had with the other initiating governments. Solicit, you would vet them and make recommendation to the initiating governments. The deal, if you will, that we cut with ourselves is that the groups that you solicited members from, they would essentially send you whom they wanted to represent their interests. So what we have so far is Okanogan has sent us names. Well, I should go back and talk. So other than I haven't penciled in which of the commissioners will serve on the planning unit. We have Mr. O'Brien. We don't have an alternate. We have the Mayor of Womack and McDaniel, the administrator, as the alternate. I have been, the Colorado Confederate Tribes have not sent me an affirmative, we are going to participate in response yet. But I have actually been in discussion with a number of their staff, and they're talking about it. So they haven't shut the door either. So I'm still waiting for that word. Consistent with direction, I did not send an invitation letter to the Yakima Nation. So in terms of the municipal entities, the cities, Okanogan, Tonasket, Oroville, Riverside have sent me names. I haven't heard from Concanelli. I don't believe I've heard from Brewster. No, nor have I heard from PUD number 1.
And the only reason we haven't heard from Colville tribe is Because we just sent the invitation out, is that correct?
No, they're talking about it.
They're just discussing.
The different staff think it'd be a really good idea. Others aren't sure they wanna be seated, they wanna participate, but don't necessarily wanna be seated members. They're talking about it. They haven't sent me an affirmative word yet, so. We had, now, now that I think about it, once you pull up your map, then we'll come back into this. In the watershed plan, there were a number of regions. For purposes of I took the, of asking Angie to reduce it to 3, north, south, central. The lines are kind of arbitrary. They bear some resemblance to the original plan. So these are the areas we're talking about when we're talking about your land. Central. So just to put all that in context, let's go back to your list now. So we have one name, and this is one right older. We have Jim Soriano, who we figured out was in the central. We have no others have volunteered at this point, so hold that thought. I'm going to come back to it. Under our organizations, we've heard from the cattlemen's, well drillers, haven't heard from horticulture, the realtors, haven't heard from Osoyoos Lake Water Quality Society. Farm Bureau, we've talked, we don't have a name yet, so that's a tentative. Economic Alliance is in, Land Trust, Highlands Alliance, Columbia Salmon Recovery Board. We haven't heard from Rivers Conservancy. We haven't heard from Rivers Conservancy. We've heard from Water Trust, heard from Holden Builders. We heard from the Council on Environmental Law and Policy, but I don't think we've asked their names yet, so that's tentative as well. Then Columbiana, we've heard from them. Now, Commissioner Branch, you can maybe help me out with this one. The names on this next section are names that were holdovers from the earlier planning unit. Nobody has had contact with them. So, Mike Kelly, we found a name in the region that he would have represented on the old unit, but we haven't.
It seemed like he worked for an agency, but I don't.
Okay, we haven't had any luck, and we can't find anything on Maria Cornwall.
Yeah,
Who is he?
No,
he lives up,
we found contact information for her.
he's retired.
When?
He lives up,
Friday, I did.
Well, I stand correct. Apparently they did find contact information from Maria Cornwall.
For who? Oh, Maria?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mariah,
no.
actually?
Right.
going out of, if you go out of Loomis past Gary Wills, what's the first, that's not Redmond Creek, it's, Cecile Creek.
Oh,
He's the very last residence
Oh, I-
that we
I
lost
guess I
up
don't
to
remember.
about Cecile Creek.
Mike Kelly.
Yeah.
So, that would match up then, all right. So if you have a number or something, Commissioner, we just haven't found one. Well, we found the location, you have contact information?
Maybe, I don't know.
Well, through the tax sifter,
Oh,
his property in Loomis.
Yeah.
you know.
Well, okay, right, we know that, but we don't have like an email or anything,
No, not an email or a
phone
phone
number
number.
or something.
If you had checked with Craig Nelson,
did.
I'm sorry?
checked with Craig
Craig.
Nelson.
Frank Nelson.
Craig Nelson.
Craig Nelson, no.
Yeah. I mean, they had a mail list that they sent out to all that time, so I'm not sure.
Who was the last guy to leave Friday? How did you guys get all this stuff from that company?
Cause I did it.
I see. Okay, fair enough.
No.
That takes care of that then.
It's,
Well, I just found it and then Rocky populated the spreadsheet, and so you probably were just left out of the loop.
Okay. So anyway, I'll
Yeah,
spell
you got-
government's right
He's
next
got,
time as well.
he's got Mike Kelly's.
yeah, it's Mike Kelly, MikeKelly, SWC@gmail.com.
So, the $1 million question, actually there's a couple, is I can go ahead and set a first meeting for I think Thursday was what I was gonna shoot for the first meeting on October fourth. Get everybody that we have there, Vanessa's available, and begin the discussion.
I think we should, and hopefully that'll prompt some people to.
Well, I'm thinking, and that'll show we're doing something, and sometimes we get everybody together, they have names of folks that they can,
Well, landowner at large, in the south end, it should get a hold of Deborah's Farms.
well, true,
Yeah.
true, okay. Private timber management, since we haven't been doing timber designations, we pretty much lost contact with all the different guys who used to do the management plans and whatnot. I have no idea if any of them are still, is there,
Clay
out of-
Brown's still around.
pardon?
Clay Brown.
Clay Brown?
He's around, retired, right?
Huh?
He's retired, right, from DNR?
DNR, yeah.
Okay.
He did a lot, yeah, he did a lot of job.
I mean, in terms of that category, my assumption was some of the, I mean, they became consultants. You used to do the forest management plans for your open space
He was
timber.
doing.
That one now would probably be a likely candidate,
Yeah.
Who?
but not who, what.
Oh.
Clay Brown was one of them, if I recall correctly. He used to do the
Yeah.
management plans. Remember when we,
Yeah,
when we
exactly.
went through all that, we don't do that.
For open
process.
space timber, he would, yeah.
So, if that works for the commissioners, I'll just go ahead and send a note out that we're gonna have our first meeting on, I think it's October fourth, that Thursday. First one in the evening, we'll set up, we can get one from, I believe it was the Conservation District, has a lot of calling capability, and see if we can't get a kickoff meeting while Vanessa's available, and start the discussion. In the interim, if the commissioners have any ideas, and Gebbers obviously is a likely candidate for landowner large south, but we'll go ahead and start pulling some water rights out of those different zones and see if any names crop up as folks that might be interested in participating.
Are we relying on the member to provide the alternate?
For the groups that we asked.
Yeah, so.
We weren't, other ones, for instance, the Mike Kelly, we didn't ask them to suggest an alternate.
Right, so we would be looking for.
So we need to look for alternates, right? We can begin to do some direct outreach. We can begin to communicate with the other groups that have agreed to participate, cattlemen's and whatnot, to try to come up with some other landowners. We're trying to avoid one guy filling 5 spots, if we can avoid that.
Diversity.
You know, and I realize landowner can belong to many things.
Yep.
If all the landowners are the governing body for the cattlemen's, I'm not sure we're necessarily done what the commissioners wish to accomplish. But on the other hand, they're willing to participate, that's something.
Yep.
So, okay, first meeting October 4th, I'll move ahead with that. Any names come to your mind, anyone we can maybe contact? We almost always, on all these advisory committees, need to do a little outreach, extra outreach, to get those last spots filled. We'll communicate with, Commissioner, do you know who the president for the horticulture is? Is it still Dan?
He's the basically executive secretary.
Okay.
President for Hort right now is, Dan would know.
Okay.
I
Well,
Pest control, I think, is, Grant, or not Grant, they used to own the grocery store in Tonasket, the north end grocery store.
Oh, Al,
Al, yeah,
second.
yeah, he's pest control. I can see the kid's face, I can't call his name, it's President Fort, but Dan would have it.
okay, well, we'll check with Dan then. Commissioner Branch, do you have any contacts with the Soyuz Lake Water Quality Society? We pulled off stuff off the internet. We sent them a letter, but I'm told the mail system up in that part of the country can be notoriously slow.
I can check
Okay,
with at least one person.
right.
And the water board up there
say if we could get a name and a contact, we'll do some specific outreach. Okay, I will move in with what we have at the moment, what the spots. When I call Vanessa about the other grants, I'll double check on this as well. I prepared a memo, which I sent to you, and I'm now giving you a hard copy. If you are comfortable at this point, again, the deal was you would make recommendation to the initiating governments. If the list, as you've now seen it, is acceptable to you, I would ask a motion from you recommending appointment by the initiating governments.
Then we can just add to that list and fill in the blanks.
We can always do appointments as they come in.
So I move to accept the list and submit it to the initiating governments for their review and approval.
Second.
Motion second, discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All same sign, motion carried.
Mr. Ford, our advocate for the Lake District, would also have contact with the.
Waterstrap.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I believe, those guys were communicating back and forth, just as a thought, but I'll go through the water board too, see if I can help with it. We're typically made up of a lot of retired people, and so this long time since we've seen it, I think we've lost it. I know we had one.
Commissioners, that is your agenda, not on it. I find myself having to travel to Shelton Thursday and Friday of this week, so I will be out of the office. My apologies for the short notice. Anything for me?
Don't believe so.
Covered it all.
Very good.
Is there anything we didn't cover that I had been talking to you about? We talked about those loans. I mean, those, grants.
No. Actually, there's one thing I do want to mention to you. Again, you'll recall I generated an ordinance for interim controls in your subdivision application materials, the requirements. That would be specific to the closed basins in 48. Unless you prefer I not, I'm inclined to put that back in front of you for some additional discussion. Because we did not get the comments out of the Department of Ecology on an application that went out for notice, which is, the information they provided me verbally is fairly significant in terms of project review, but now I have absolutely nothing in writing to back it up. If we're going to treat those closed basins differently, and arguably we should probably have something in code to back that up.
We gotta talk to it, because ecology has to determine whether when, or if they drill a well, they're in hydraulic continuity.
And if we're going to see that, and the key is, I think that's a given, they need to do that. If we're going to make people do that before they get preliminary approval, assuming they do, I think we need something in code to do that. Now, I went to the directors conference, we had our law update, which is always very useful, but there's been one case that's been rolling around for years, and the ruling would lead me to conclude there's always been some peril to it, but there's a lot more peril now if we impose standards and requirements and things like that, even with the reason that's different from what everyone else has to do. At some point, you should codify that. So anyway, I'll put it back in front of you for a bigger discussion.
Yeah, cause there's no point in them even coming to us and us going through the motions if their water is not gonna be.
If I have to deny it because they haven't drilled all the holes and got all that done, then we've accomplished nothing.
Right.
If they know upfront they have to do that, put it in the code. Put it in the code, and then it's just a gift, you have. And if you're gonna subdivide in closed basins, it's all just, I'm only talking closed basin stuff.
Yeah.
Only in those areas where they have those restricted, the requirement of rule.
Seems to be free to do that.
You know, and the difference I've done, what we would have done was gone through the process, assuming everything else passed muster, granted preliminary approval, and then they would have done all that before they got fined. But that doesn't seem to be the accepted process.
You know, the other thing that we don't, I mean, and I know this is probably what's not gonna be like, we don't have a clearing and grading ordinance, which is also a little bit problematic, because if somebody goes, well, I'm gonna put in a road up the hill so I can service 50 home sites. And then all of a sudden, we come back and say, well, the road has to be at a certain grade, and, you know, has to be binding for a truck to get in and stuff like that, then you've accomplished nothing also there.
The private drive that you were, yeah, this might even been before your time, I guess, the private drive that came off Burma Road to service that whole series of short plats up above, I have no idea how many phone calls I got about it. And, you don't need a permit, build a road. When they did come in finally for their applications, everything was wrong. Culverts weren't placed right, the roadbed was, I mean, nothing was right. And they were cranky, you know, they put all that money into it. And then Public Works, well, had they known, and, you know, whether they should have known or not, it's probably open for discussion, but more the point, I guess, is if you're gonna build a road of that nature, you have to at least come in and talk Public Works. You can save yourself an awful lot of money.
And I'm talking about, it's an ordinance with common sense to it, you know, I mean, if you're just going and redoing your roadbed on an existing road.
No, we can tailor it for, but for instance, I don't know how many calls you've gotten, I've gotten several with the marijuana farm up on the hill going out of Omak. They're starting to clear ground, they wanna know how they can do that. Well, they can clear all the ground they want. Put plant in it, I have no dog in the fight. Now, do we wanna reach to that level of detail, that's a discussion, but it's probably a discussion we ought to have at some point. Cause people can do a lot of stuff, we have absolutely no reach into it at all, until they actually then come in and apply for something. Just an observation.
Well, hey, you know something that we went back to the list, you know, more so than the Water Quality Society would be the Water Board.
Yeah.
Well,
Okanogan Water.
I mean, we certainly
Yeah, we should,
massage that.
we should probably put that, yeah, we should probably put them on there, that's, I mean, they're dealing
In
with,
place of or in addition to.
yeah, in it. Probably.
Okay.
That's, you know, they're more in tune to the flow.
Okay, well,
on there.
I mean, it makes some sense. Did you? Okay.
That was just, when I was thinking about contacting them for the Water Quality Society, I'm like, wait a minute, they're the ones that actually.
We kill two birds.
Yeah.
So you can get their contact
Yeah,
information.
actually, I haven't, if we're interested, I mean, I've got an email going right to Anna Warwood.
Okay.
I'll just suggest it.
Perfect.